The autumn air carried the smell of pine rot and earth. A hiker named Marcus Webb pushed through a thicket of Douglas fir near Crescent Ridge Trail in the San Juan Mountains, Colorado, his boots crunching on deadfall. He wasn't searching for anything in particular, just taking a Sunday walk along a route he'd traveled dozens of times. But this time, a fallen ponderosa pine, its trunk hollowed by decades of weather and decay, caught his eye. It lay at a 45-degree angle across a ravine, about 60 feet from the trail, half buried under leaf litter and moss. The wood was silvered, weathered to the color of old bone. Marcus approached it almost without thinking. His hand touched the rim of the hollow cavity, and he stopped. Inside, wedged deep within the rotted center, he saw something pale and fabric-like. His stomach contracted. It was a sleeve, a human arm. He called 911 at 2:47 p.m. on October 8th. The dispatcher heard his voice shake as he read the coordinates from his GPS unit. 20 minutes later, the first responder helicopter was already circling the ravine. By 6:15 p.m., a recovery team had secured the scene. The remains inside that tree trunk belonged to a 28-year-old woman named Rachel Kemper. She'd been missing for 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days. What made investigators pause as they photographed the hollow was something else. Rachel's wrists bore visible ligature marks. Her hands had been tied, not loosely, but with deliberate tension that left deep grooves in the bone itself. The tree had become a tomb, and the question was no longer whether Rachel had survived a fall, gotten lost, or hidden from a storm. The question was, who put her there? One detail lay beside her remains, wedged into a cleft in the rotted wood. It would reframe everything, but that discovery came later, after the recovery team had carefully documented every inch of the scene, after the photographs had been filed, after the body had been transported to the county medical examiner's office. For now, the hollow tree stood as a silent monument to 4 years of unanswered questions. Stay with this investigation. What was left behind with Rachel's body would change everything about how we understood her disappearance. Rachel Kemper lived in Millbrook, Colorado, a town of 4,000 people nestled on the eastern slope of the San Juan Range. She worked as a wildlife biologist for the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Division, specializing in alpine ecosystem surveys. By all accounts, she was meticulous, experienced, and cautious, the type of professional who filed detailed route plans and checked weather obsessively before venturing into the backcountry. On June 14, 2020, Rachel woke at 5:30 a.m. in her small rented cabin outside town. The cabin had a green metal roof and a porch facing northeast. She made coffee in a ceramic mug, dark roast, no sugar, and packed her gear methodically. Her standard field kit included a satellite communicator, a water filter, emergency rations, a first aid kit, and a leather-bound survey log where she recorded species observations and environmental data by hand. At 6:15 a.m., and she left a handwritten note on her kitchen table, surveying Upper Crescent Ridge for species density markers, backed by 18 SAT GPS coordinates logged with office. The note was written in blue ballpoint pen, her handwriting precise and uniform. The timestamp was precise. Rachel was not someone who approximated details. Her vehicle, a white Toyota 4Runner registered to her name, was parked outside. The inspection sticker in the windshield showed the vehicle had been serviced 2 months earlier. The odometer read 47,123 miles. Security camera footage from the Millbrook General Store at milepost 12, taken at 6:52 a.m., shows a woman matching Rachel's description in a red fleece jacket and black hiking pants, her standard field uniform, purchasing a bottle of electrolyte drink and a protein bar. The cashier, a man named Derek Voss, remembered her because she asked about trail conditions. She wanted to know if the ridge road had washed out, Derek later told investigators. "I told her I hadn't heard anything about closures. She seemed relieved." Rachel's appearance that day became a fixed point in the investigation. The red fleece jacket had a torn seam under the left armpit, a detail her colleague Monica Chen had pointed out days earlier during a field briefing. The black pants bore a faded coffee stain on the right thigh, visible in the store's surveillance footage. Rachel wore a digital watch with a silver band, a Timex model she'd owned for 6 years. She carried a state-issued backpack, beige canvas with CPWD embroidered in blue thread on the front pocket. Her vehicle's GPS unit logged its location at 7:18 a.m. The Crescent Ridge Trailhead parking area, about 14 miles north of town, at an elevation of 9,140 feet. A handwritten permit slip found in Rachel's glove compartment indicated she'd planned a loop survey encompassing the ridge itself and the secondary drainage known as Lost Horse Canyon. The permit was dated June 13th and signed by her supervisor, Thomas Redmond, a 54-year-old administrator who had worked at CPWD for 13 years. The permit noted her planned finish time as 5:02 p.m., allowing a 1-hour buffer before darkness and before the forecasted storms arrived. The weather report for June 14th predicted afternoon thunderstorms moving in around 3 p.m., with hail possible above 10,500 feet. High temperature was expected to be 73 degrees. Rachel had written a small note in the margin of her permit. "Check northern auxiliary drainage. Possible anomaly noted in June 11th survey." She was never seen again. The first 72 hours brought no sign of Rachel. On June 14th at 6:30 p.m., after Rachel had not returned and did not answer her satellite communicator, her supervisor, Thomas Redmond, called the Millbrook Police Department. By 7:45 p.m., a search was being coordinated out of the county sheriff's office. The weather had deteriorated. The forecast storms had arrived early and brought heavy rain and isolated lightning strikes to the region. Visibility dropped to less than 200 feet in places. Wind gusts reached 35 miles per hour on the exposed ridges. Ground teams began the search at first light on June 15th. The initial effort focused on the Crescent Ridge Trail itself and the marked routes leading from it. A team of 6 volunteers, led by search and rescue coordinator James Garrett, swept the main path with trained dogs, a black German shepherd named Nero and a reddish-brown bloodhound called Scout. They worked systematically from the trailhead upward, moving slowly through terrain that ranged from dense forest to rocky alpine tundra at higher elevations. The dogs worked with precision, their handlers moving behind them, watching for any change in behavior or alertness. Nero was trained to detect human scent in wilderness conditions. Scout specialized in tracking specific individuals based on scent articles. Both dogs had been used in 17 previous searches in the San Juan region. Neither had failed to locate a subject within 5 miles of the search zone, until now. By mid-morning on June 15th, SEAR had extended the search to include the Lost Horse Canyon drainage. Drones equipped with thermal cameras scanned the eastern slopes. The thermal imagery would detect body heat from a living person or even significant heat retention from a recently deceased body in the cool mountain air. Helicopters based out of Denver's Rocky Mountain Rescue Center joined the operation by noon. The search grid expanded north and south, eventually encompassing an area of roughly 18 square miles within the first week. The terrain itself became an antagonist. The San Juan Range is characterized by sharp elevation changes, dense forest coverage, and numerous ravines and side canyons that are difficult to traverse. Summer snowmelt from the recent cold season had swollen streams and created new waterfalls and impassable sections. The vegetation grew thick and tangled in places, slowing searchers to a pace of less than 1 mile per hour. Several volunteers suffered minor injuries, twisted ankles, cuts from sharp rock, exposure to cold rain at higher elevations. 3 false leads emerged during the first 2 weeks. On June 16th, a hiker reported seeing a bright red fabric tied to a juniper branch near the Ridgeline Fork Junction, about 3 miles north of Rachel's planned route. The report came in at 10:43 a.m. SR teams converged on the location by 2:10 p.m., moving through underbrush and across open meadow. The fabric turned out to be a plastic survey marker left by a Forest Service crew in 2018. The marker bore an alphanumeric code, FS 2018-0447. It matched no current survey projects. The disappointment was audible in the radio chatter as the teams received the update. On June 18th, drone footage captured what appeared to be a body lying face down in a ravine near Snowmelt Creek, roughly 4 miles northeast of the trailhead. The location had been marked by coordinates 37, 9182, 107, 49015. A specialized climbing team was mobilized. They rappelled into the ravine at 4:30 p.m. under heavy cloud cover and fading light. What they found was a mannequin, old, weathered, discarded decades earlier, probably from a roadside display or shop window that had ended up dumped in the wilderness. The finder, a young climber named David Ortiz, remembered the sound of his own voice crackling over the radio. "False positive, it's a dummy moving on." On June 22nd, a partial boot print was discovered in soft soil near a washout area at coordinates 37, 9047, 107, 4782. SR photographed it, took measurements, approximately size 8, consistent with women's hiking boots, and made a plaster cast. The print showed a distinctive tread pattern matching the model of boot Rachel was known to wear, a Salomon Quest 4D model in grey and pink. The location placed the print on a route that deviated significantly from Rachel's planned survey path. The deviation was notable. Rachel's permit indicated she would stay on marked trails and establish survey corridors. This print was found in rough terrain, off-trail, in a direction that seemed random. SAR teams gridded the area for 2 full days. They found nothing else, no backpack, no gear, no secondary prints, no disturbed vegetation suggesting a body had been dragged or carried. The washout itself had obscured whatever trail might have existed. The print seemed isolated, a ghost trace with no narrative connecting it to anything else. By late June, the active search began to scale back. Volunteers returned to their jobs and families. The professional SAR teams reduced rotation cycles from daily to 3 times weekly. Weather reports continued to forecast afternoon thunderstorms. The window for finding someone alive had realistically closed. By July 1st, the search was officially transitioned to cold case status, though periodic reviews and small-scale search efforts would continue through the following year. The recovery of Rachel's remains on October 8, 2024, 4 years into a cold case file, arrived without warning. When investigators first approached the hollowed ponderosa trunk, they documented the scene with clinical precision. The tree lay at a 47-degree angle, its far end anchored against a granite outcrop. The interior cavity measured approximately 30 inches in diameter and stretched 13 feet from mouth to the rotted tip. The opening faced upward and to the south, angled in such a way that rainfall would drain away from the interior rather than collect inside it. Over 4 years, this drainage pattern had kept the interior relatively dry and had allowed the remains to undergo a process of natural mummification rather than decomposition. Rachel's remains were positioned deep within the cavity, roughly 8 feet from the nearest opening. This positioning was critical. The distance made it physically impossible for Rachel to have simply fallen into the hollow or crawled in seeking shelter. Someone had placed her there deliberately or forced her there. The ligature marks on her wrists were immediate and undeniable. Both wrists bore deep grooves in the bone, consistent with nylon cord under sustained tension. The medical examiner, Dr. Sarah Kovac, noted that the marks showed signs of struggle, irregular depth, abraded edges, and evidence of continued pressure after death. Rachel had not been tied post-mortem. She had been bound while alive and left to die inside that tree. But the centerpiece discovery, the object that reframed the entire case, lay beside Rachel's remains, wedged into a cleft in the wood, a laminated permit card belonging to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Division. It bore Rachel's photograph and her employee identification number, 084721. The card's back bore something else, a handwritten message in blue ballpoint pen. The message read, "She found the salt cache. She couldn't leave." Investigators photographed the card from multiple angles. The handwriting was clean, deliberate, methodical, not rushed, not panicked. The penmanship suggested someone with technical training or habit, someone accustomed to recording data, maintaining logs, documenting observations. The meaning of the message was obscure, but its intent was unmistakable. It was a confession or an explanation, left behind with Rachel's body as a record of reasoning. The phrase "salt cache" was immediately flagged for investigation. Rachel's job involved ecosystem surveys, species density mapping, and alpine hydrology, not geology, mining, or natural resource extraction. Why would she be concerned with a salt cache, and why would knowledge of it constitute a reason to kill her? The investigation that followed consumed 6 months and involved state and federal agencies. The FBI opened a file on October 10, 2024. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation launched a forensic analysis. Field teams returned to the Crescent Ridge area with new purpose and new questions. The case moved from cold storage to active status overnight. The first breakthrough came from Rachel's field notes, recovered from her cabin, in a leather-bound survey log dated to June 11th, 3 days before her disappearance. Rachel had written the following entry in her precise handwriting: "Notice something unusual today during ridge survey. Found what appears to be old salt blocks and mineral lick residue in northern auxiliary drainage near mile marker 4. 2. Unusual density and arrangement. Does not match natural Cape Rock seepage patterns we see elsewhere on the ridge. Crystallization suggests industrial-grade product, not natural deposit. Geometric arrangement inconsistent with animal activity. Warrants closer inspection. Will include in next survey rotation." Investigators cross-reference this entry with Rachel's planned route for June 14th, mile marker 4. 2 on the Crescent Ridge auxiliary drainage fell directly within her intended survey loop. More importantly, the location was less than a quarter mile from where the partial boot print had been discovered on June 22nd, the print that had seemed like an orphan clue, connected to nothing. A second breakthrough came from a chain of custody analysis of Rachel's personal effects. Between June and October 2024, property evidence from Rachel's cabin had been catalogued and stored according to protocol. A receipt found in a kitchen drawer dated May 3, 2020 came from a commercial supplier in Utah called Mountain Mineral Trading Company. The receipt documented the purchase of 500 lbs bulk mineral supplement, animal caloric supplement salt blocks, food grade, lot MMT 2020-04871. The receipt bore a signature, T. Redmond. Thomas Redmond was Rachel's supervisor at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. The name alone was insufficient. But when forensic teams collected samples from inside the hollowed tree, dust and residue from the cavity walls, they identified sodium chloride at unusually high concentrations. Lab analysis of crystal structure and mineral composition matched the metallurgical profile of salt blocks manufactured by Mountain Mineral Trading Company during the 2020 production run. The lot number on the batch matched the receipt, MMT 2020-04871. The probability of random matching was less than 0.001%. Investigators obtained purchase records from Mountain Mineral Trading Company spanning the years 2015 through June 2020. Between February and June 2020 alone, Thomas Redmond had made 4 separate purchases totaling 2,800 pounds of food-grade salt blocks. The receipts were charged to a credit card registered in his name and billed to a P.O. box in Millbrook, P.O. Box 847, registered in his name since 2015. The transaction history showed a pattern: regular purchases of mineral salt in quantities inconsistent with personal use. The question shifted. Why would a wildlife biologist's supervisor purchase nearly 3 tons of mineral salt in a span of 4 months? Thomas Redmond had worked for Colorado Parks and Wildlife for 13 years. He was 54 years old, divorced, no children. He lived alone in a house outside Millbrook at 412 Pinewood Drive. He had a master's degree in environmental science from the University of Colorado and a reputation as a careful, if unremarkable, administrator. But Redmond also had a secret project, one he had not disclosed to his employers or to Rachel. Between 2015 and 2020, Redmond had been conducting what he called a long-term ungulate habituation and nutritional mapping study in the San Juan backcountry. The study was not formally approved by the state wildlife agency. Redmond had funded it privately with money from an inheritance, approximately $180,000 received in 2014 from a deceased uncle. He had been systematically establishing mineral lick sites, salt caches, throughout the Crescent Ridge region to study elk and mule deer behavior in response to concentrated nutritional resources. The salt blocks created predictable congregation points. They attracted animals during specific seasons, particularly in late spring and early summer, when natural mineral sources were depleted. This allowed Redmond to observe feeding patterns, social hierarchies, and herd movement across the terrain. It was scientifically interesting work, the type of field research that could produce publishable papers and interesting data sets. But it violated several state and federal regulations governing wildlife study permits, habitat manipulation, and ungulate management protocols. The unauthorized alteration of the landscape through mineral supplementation could affect natural migration patterns and animal populations in unpredictable ways. More immediately, it was illegal. Rachel had discovered the cache during her ecosystem survey on June 11th. She had documented it in her field notes, and she had signaled her intention to inspect the site more closely on her next survey rotation, the rotation planned for June 14, 2020. An investigator named Detective Maria Sanchez conducted the interrogation of Thomas Redmond on October 24, 2024, at the Millbrook Police Department's interview room. The session lasted 4 hours and was recorded. The recording was later entered into evidence at trial. When presented with the evidence, the receipt from Mountain Mineral Trading Company, the satellite imagery of the cache sites, the chemical analysis of the salt residue from inside the tree, Redmond's demeanor shifted from confusion to resignation to anger, cycling through several times over the course of 90 minutes. "She was going to report it," Redmond said at one point in the recording. His voice was steady, almost conversational. "She was going to file a violation notice. It would have ended everything, the study, my career, everything I'd built." "So you killed her," Sanchez said. It was not a question. Redmond did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice was different, flatter, as if describing something distant and clinical. "I met her at the trailhead on June 14th. She was surprised to see me. I told her I'd realized I'd filed the wrong permit coordinates and wanted to confirm her route before she went out. She was skeptical. I could see it in her face. But she was polite, professional. We walked together to the northern drainage, and I showed her the mineral lick site. I explained the project to her, all the details. I thought maybe she would understand, that she would see the scientific value in it. But she didn't, Sanchez said. She said she had to report it. She said it was her job. She said the state would need to investigate the habitat impacts, and she had an obligation to file the report within 72 hours of discovery. She wasn't angry about it. She wasn't threatening. She was just professional. She was going to do her job. And you decided that wasn't acceptable, Sanchez said. I decided that I couldn't let her leave that ridge. What happened next became a matter of legal record through the subsequent trial. Redmond's account was corroborated by fiber evidence found in his truck, Rachel's jacket. Fibers were present on the passenger seat and in the cargo area. Her DNA was found beneath his fingernails in trace quantities consistent with a struggle. The ligature marks on her wrists matched the nylon cord that was discovered in his garage, coiled beneath a shelf, partially used, but with the cut end still bearing marks consistent with being cut by a specific knife blade recovered from his kitchen. The hollowed tree was not a random choice. Redmond had scouted it weeks earlier as part of his field survey work for his unauthorized study. He knew its location precisely, coordinates 37. 8921, 107, 4703. He knew it would be isolated enough to provide privacy, yet accessible enough that he could move Rachel's body before nightfall and before the weather deteriorated further. He had brought the permit card with him, Rachel's own employee ID, which he had taken from her backpack after she died. He had written the message himself, carefully, in ballpoint pen in his truck during the drive back to town. She found the salt cache. She couldn't leave. It was meant, he later claimed during trial testimony, to be an explanation rather than a boast. A record of his reasoning, left at the scene so that anyone finding her body would understand the context and the motive. Investigators asked him why he had used that specific language during his police interrogation. Redmond hesitated for a long moment before responding. "Because I meant it literally," he said. "She couldn't leave, not alive. Once she knew about the salt, once she decided to report it, there was no scenario where my life didn't end. My career, my reputation, everything I'd built over 30 years of professional life, it was all going to be destroyed." "So you chose to destroy hers instead," Sanchez said. Redmond did not answer. The trial concluded in May 2025. Thomas Redmond was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is currently held in Cannon City Correctional Facility in southern Colorado, in a cell in the Secure Housing Unit. He has appealed his conviction. The appeal is pending. The evidence supporting the conviction was comprehensive and forensically sound. The chemical analysis of the mineral salt proved the cache was Redmond's project and directly linked the cache to the remains. The fiber evidence placed Rachel in his vehicle. The DNA evidence placed her in physical contact with him. The ligature marks and the autopsy confirmed she had been alive when bound and that she had struggled against the bonds. The handwriting on the permit card matched samples provided by Redmond's own documents submitted to the court: banking records, personal notes, field documentation. The motive was clear. Rachel had discovered something that threatened Redmond's carefully constructed, unauthorized research project, and he had chosen to eliminate that threat rather than face professional and legal consequences. Rachel's parents, who had spent 4 years in the limbo of an unsolved disappearance, finally received closure. Though the knowledge of how their daughter died brought its own particular pain. Her mother, Carol Kemper, gave a brief statement to reporters after the verdict. "We knew Rachel was dedicated to her work. We know now that her dedication cost her everything. We hope that knowing the truth brings some form of peace to others who have lost someone to violence." The salt cache sites themselves were catalogued and dismantled by Colorado parks and wildlife personnel. The mineral licks were destroyed, and the area was designated off-limits to further research without explicit state and federal permits. Redmond's unauthorized study was officially terminated and entered into the scientific record as a cautionary tale about the ethics of conducting fieldwork without proper oversight and approval. But one detail remains unresolved, a detail that continues to generate questions and speculation among investigators and amateur researchers alike. During the excavation of the primary salt cache site near Crescent Ridge mile marker 4.2, investigators discovered multiple laminated documents scattered throughout the deposit area. These documents appeared to have been exposed to weather for years, their edges curled and bleached by sun and rain. They were survey permits, all of them, all dated between 2016 and 2020, all signed by Thomas Redmond in his distinctive handwriting, but all describing different research projects than the one he had acknowledged conducting. One permit documented a soil composition and mycological density study across a 3-mile section of the ridge. Another described alpine stream pH dynamics and macroinvertebrate assessment in the Lost Horse Canyon drainage. A third referenced microclimate variation and vegetation phenology tracking across a 5-square-mile survey area. Each permit bore official state letterhead and appeared to have been submitted through proper channels. Yet official records at the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Office showed no corresponding approvals or file numbers matching these permits. It appeared that Thomas Redmond had been forging state permits for years, conducting multiple unauthorized research projects simultaneously, layering false documentation on top of false documentation. The salt cache was not an isolated deviation from protocol. It was part of a systematic pattern of deception that stretched back nearly a decade. Investigators searched his house and his office for records of these other projects. They found nothing. No field notes, no data analysis, no equipment, no GPS data files, no evidence that these projects had ever actually taken place. The forged permits appeared to be for show, perhaps to create the impression of legitimate research activity if anyone ever questioned his work, or perhaps to establish a false paper trail that would obscure his real intentions. To this day, investigators cannot determine the true purpose behind the forged permits, the false documentation, or the elaborate system of deception that Redmond had constructed around his unauthorized research. Why would he go to such lengths to create the appearance of multiple projects that left no physical trace? What was he actually doing in those mountains during those years? Was there another purpose to the salt caches beyond ungulate behavior observation? Thomas Redmond, when asked directly about the forged permits during his trial, stated only that he could not remember filing them and suggested they might have been lost or misfiled during office reorganization. When pressed further, he declined to answer on the advice of his attorney. No evidence supports that claim. The forged permits remain in evidence storage in the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's warehouse, unanswered questions printed on laminated paper, waiting in a climate-controlled room for someone to finally determine what truth they were meant to conceal. They are accessible to researchers and investigators, but their purpose remains opaque. The salt cache study that cost Rachel Kemper her life was real and documented. The other projects, the other permits, the other coordinates, those remain mysteries. Rachel Kemper is buried in Millbrook Cemetery under a headstone that bears her name, the dates of her birth and death, and a single line from her favorite poet. In wildness is the preservation of the soul. Every autumn, when the aspens turn gold in the San Juan Mountains, hikers avoid the hollow ponderosa near Crescent Ridge. The tree stands, as it always has, split and rotted and half buried in pine needles, pointing skyward with its cavity open and empty, a monument to the moment when science became cover for something far darker, and when the pursuit of knowledge collided with the desire to keep secrets hidden beneath meters of wood and stone. What was Thomas Redmond actually researching with those forged permits, and why did he create such an elaborate false documentation system? The permit card he left with Rachel's body explained his immediate motive, but it didn't explain the years of false paperwork that preceded her death. The other permits remain filed away, their true purpose unknown. Share your theories in the comments below. And if you found this investigation compelling, subscribe to the channel for more deep dive case breakdowns that explore the unsolved layers beneath the surface.